I was recently in Dubai for the last few weeks. Incentives to do business in Dubai is a growing market.
What you think doesn't work in Dubai?
Salary is very low for most countries, so they come to the UAE, hope.
Those people who earn £70,000 every year, more than 50% of the entire UK tax.
I think you said that the draft legislation has been...
Yeah, so the finance bill is at committee stage right now in respect of the consequences to inheritance tax.
Hello everyone, welcome to this first of many, hopefully, in this podcast called The Way of Wealth, where we'll talk everything from tax planning, wealth creation, and anything that comes to my mind really. My name is Prajesh, and this is my co-host.
Hey guys, I'm Mohammed. Enjoy whatever we end up talking about.
Yeah, we've talked a little bit about what we want to talk about today, and I was recently in Dubai for the last few weeks, and we've had many conversations over the last couple of years about expanding our own business to the Middle East, to Asia, and using Dubai as a hub spot for that. And it got me thinking about why is Dubai such a good spot to move to do business in, and what are the pros and cons of moving to Dubai, and on the flip side, what are the pros and cons of doing business and working in the UK. I think number one's the weather. I mean, that doesn't require any explanation really, but there's a host of other factors, whether it's low tax or just incentives to do business in Dubai as a growing market.
But what about lifestyle? What's the lifestyle like?
Yeah, it's I'd say this is both a pro and a con. I think the lifestyle in Dubai is certainly not for everyone. To describe it in a few words, it's opulent luxury, wherever you look. Certainly in kind of the main spots of Dubai, whether you go to Dubai Marina or Business Bay or where most of the expats are living.
But is that not a good thing? I mean, what's the drawback?
It can be a good thing, but coming back to the UK, there's a certain sense of, people are going to laugh at this, but there's a certain sense of charm and character about a cold, miserable day in London. But putting that to the side, where does the charm and character come from? Well, London in general is steeped in centuries of history. Dubai is a very new city. Like, you look at everything that's been built, it's all pretty much in the last 20 to 30 years.
Yeah.
But look, I mean, in terms of lifestyle, the safety is second to none. The cleanliness is second to none. I mean, in a bar or a restaurant, you can see people just leaving behind their bags or their phones on the table when they go elsewhere. The cleanliness, you walk around the public places, Dubai Mall, you see people scrubbing the floor. You can see your reflection in the floor.
Yeah.
In some of these public places. So that definitely makes it a very inviting place to live and work in, which you can contrast that to the UK, where you definitely wouldn't leave your phone alone in the public place, and in certain places they definitely don't scrub the floor. But if we get a bit more granular, I think from a business perspective, setting up in Dubai, in terms of the tax rates that are applicable in Dubai versus here, and just to get really specific with this, there's no income tax, there's no capital gains tax, there's no inheritance tax. There was a corporation tax introduced in the January 2022, so it's 9% above 375,000 dirhams, or roughly £90,000. But you compare that to the corporation tax rate here, where it's 19% at a minimum, and if you're earning above, 250,000, then it's 25%. So yeah, there's very low, and there's 5% VAT in the UAE as well. So there's very little tax in the UAE, and that's one of the big attraction points of moving to the UAE. But we were just talking off camera whether that could actually stay, or that could stay as it is into the future? And you didn't think so.
I'll come on to that in a second, but I'm intrigued to find out what you think doesn't work so well in Dubai.
What doesn't work so well? Yeah. There's definitely a few things that stand out. I think one, I mean, coming back to the lifestyle, in terms of its kind of endless luxury and endless kind of brand spanking new construction and buildings everywhere, that doesn't fit everyone's bill, and I can understand why. It's kind of, you go to Dubai and it's one mode, right? Yeah. One mode of clean luxury and all the rest of it. Second thing is that there's definitely kind of reports or news about whether the workers or the construction workers are actually treated fairly there. And there's a fairly common pattern there. They're all from either India or Pakistan or Bangladesh or the Philippines, right? Where the basic working salary is very low for most countries, so they come to the UAE in the hope or the promise that they're going to be paid a lot higher wage. And typically, they're not. And sometimes you hear about their passports being taken away and they're forced to stay there while they work, especially in conditions that aren't or not the best to work in. Add on to that, there's definitely three distinct classes in the UAE. So you've got kind of the construction workers, the service people, essentially people or expats from developing markets. Then you've got us essentially, which is expats from developed markets. So the UAE is certainly focusing on that. And in fact, only 10% of Dubai's population is Emirati. The rest is all expats. And they are targeting the UAE, they're inviting and targeting that market to come over with all these incentives. And yeah, so expats from the developed market, and then the top class is the Emiratis. And typically the Emiratis will seek to do business within their own circles and communities, and which is not uncommon which is not just the way of business in that part of the world. It's everywhere. You go to China, you go to Japan, Japanese people stick with their circles and so forth.
I reckon you could say the same thing about the UK as well and the US, right? Because there is a clear class system in the UAE, but there's a clear class system in the UK as well. Yeah. I mean, it's the people earning billions or tens of millions in the UK, or have tens of millions of assets in the UK and have inherited wealth, trust fund children and so forth, private schools for 3 generations in, that sort of stuff. They mix with a certain different type of crowd, and they have benefited, rightly so, from phenomenal wealth management advice 3-4 generations back. So what we are seeing is a burgeoning middle class in the UK that has become incredibly asset rich in a relatively very fast period of time, but they have no idea what to do with that wealth. The class system is still there. You've got the high class, the elitists, you've got this burgeoning middle class, and you've also got that lower class. I think there was one social study that I was looking at some time back, and it classes those people from a low class as earning the equivalent of below 25,000 USD. And then you got the low middle class between 25,000 to 50,000 USD. And then from 50,000 to around 150,000 USD, that's their middle class. But if you were to take a look at it, even if you were to take a look at our clients, right, those people earning more than 150 grand a year, okay? Some of these characters although they are in a very privileged position in earning quite a lot of money every year, but relative to their asset base, okay, it may not be as much as you'd expect. And that is because we are in a very, very high tax environment. And that high tax environment just doesn't relate merely to a 45% tax charge in the UK if you're earning more than 120 grand or so a year. But it's down to the loss of a whole host of other reliefs, like the tapered annual allowance in respect of your pensions, the money purchase annual allowance, even if you're accessing your pensions early, the loss of the personal allowance even. So when you factor all of that in, there is a discussion to be had in whether the tax burden is falling equitably across most of society. And that is a very, very controversial thing to actually say, because if you actually take a look at it, I think another stat that I often use in my seminars, although I haven't used it for some time, is that those people who earn more than the equivalent of something like 70,000 pounds every year, they pay more than 50%, or they contribute more than 50% of the entire UK tax, UK income tax. That actually makes quite sense if you think about it, because how many people are actually working in the UK? Okay, how many people are off work? How many people don't earn enough to even pay 20% tax? Okay, there's quite a lot of people. So it is something that successive governments have to actually deal with quite closely in addressing employment here, or employment opportunities here. Now, as we increasingly move into a globally competitive marketplace, I mean, what makes the UK more attractive? Okay, especially if you're looking at all the major cities in the UK, whether it's London, whether it's Manchester, Birmingham, okay, and you will look at the crime rates, for example, that is increasing every year. It feels like, anyway, especially in London. And yes, you can look at the weather as well. Okay, it's a legitimate issue.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, we can have 4 or 5 seasons in a single day at times, all right? But then you couple that with the taxation, all right? It doesn't bode very well. Okay, there are other places around the world where if you are highly qualified or quite smart coming out of a university, very good university in the UK, what's stopping you from leaving to the likes of Dubai or to the likes of another part of Europe? Okay, we don't have sufficient tax incentives to retain talent, I would argue. We don't have sufficient tax incentives to attract talent. But what's more, we've got a serious lifestyle issue as well. Okay, you can potentially have a far greater lifestyle in a warmer climate. In a warmer climate that is safer, not only for you as an individual, but families as well. Because the UK feels like it's no longer family friendly. I mean, I think that is a very big concern. I mean, people are marrying a lot later, they're having children a lot later, and then when they do have children, they're not even raising the children. because you're dealing with an environment where you've got two parents who need to go to work. And I don't blame the parents, don't get me wrong, okay, because the economic policy of successive governments have led to an environment where wage growth hasn't actually kept pace with inflation. It hasn't kept pace with the cost of homes increasing. Yeah. Okay, so you need to have a two-parent you need to have a two-parent household that is actually working. Yes. But if you look at the long-term consequences of that, what is going to happen? You've got absentee parents, you've got children who have a poorer or more distant relationship with their parents. You've also got children with increasing levels of mental health issues, parents themselves having mental health issues in their own right, which in turn have an impact on the UK labour force, which in turn have an impact on the UK's income tax intake, which in turn have an impact on our pensions. Sure. Okay, the reason why it has an impact on our pensions is how on earth are those pensions going to be funded?
You talk about the state pensions.
I'm talking about state pensions. I'm talking about even final salary pensions. Okay, but even to a lesser extent, it has an impact on our defined contribution pensions, especially when especially where workers in the UK are not reviewing their pensions, and they may find that they have an above average exposure to UK shares or UK companies. Bear in mind the market cap of UK listed companies is only something like 4% globally, in contrast to 60% market cap in the US. Mm-hmm. So if we are overexposed to the UK, that means we are betting against the rest of the world, or we are betting against the US. It's nothing patriotic here, by the way, all right, to invest in the UK, right?
It sounds all doom and gloom for the UK. Is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
There is. I am a firm believer in the UK. I think, yes, the UK is going through, not just the UK, but most of the developed world is actually going through a very, very difficult period. And yes, it is in part to play because of the economic system that we have in play. And I think when I mention the economic system, I do think things like fractional reserve have a huge impact. I do think things like the fiat currency have a huge impact. I do believe things like having your economy revolve around consumerism have a huge impact, or a debt-based economy have a huge impact on the longevity of a country's economic success. To give an example, all right, most of the world is in debt, okay? How are we going to service that debt? We can only service that debt if we are producing enough to pay off the interest rate, or to meet the interest rate payments and then pay off the underlying capital. But if we've now created a social environment where, because we've got that interest that we've needed to pay off at a micro level, at the individual level, okay, and we've got that at the state level as well, right? Okay, if we've got all of that to pay off, what personal levels of stress and anxiety is that causing us? And I would argue that is causing us phenomenal anxiety, which is why we have record levels of employee absenteeism, because they're off work due to stress. Because we also have people working from home increasingly. I mean, we don't have sufficient data yet that I've seen that is reliable, but since the pandemic, I would argue, or I would, less about arguing here, but I would not be surprised to see if the increase in working at home will have a significant or tangible impact on UK productivity. So I'm in two minds about working from home, by the way. I think for more experienced employees who know what they're doing, who've learnt sufficient from their peers in their younger years, there is an argument, yeah, great, work from home. But for newer employees, I think they need to learn from their peers who are more experienced, and they need to come into the office. And just in the same way we work together, when we're both in the office, how quickly is it, how easier is it for us to actually run ideas off one another?
Yeah, of course, much easier.
Okay. Whereas you may have something right in your head, and I'm working from home. You may not be, okay, I don't want to hassle Mohammed here. I don't want to even send him a WhatsApp.
Sure.
I'll try and remember to ask him another time. Same thing. Okay. But I encourage that. I mean, look, just ask me whenever, right? But imagine that at like a national level, right? And so many people are doing the same thing, as in not asking for advice from more knowledgeable peers, which they would have if they were in the same office. Now, incrementally, if you add all of that up, logically, that must have an impact on UK economic productivity. Now, the consequences for that, when are we going to see it? Maybe we're seeing it today, okay? And the reason why I say maybe we're seeing it today is how many people are actually leaving the UK? Emigrating from the UK. I mean, the right often talks about how many people coming into the UK, and the amount of illegal immigration that we have, it has less than 1% impact on our GDP.
Right.
But the amount of people leaving the UK, and I would argue the amount of people leaving the UK, or the people leaving the UK, are not because of the illegal immigration coming into the UK, right?
Sure.
The people leaving the UK are leaving because of disastrous policy by successive governments.
Yeah.
And we can talk about, why that is.
Sure.
All right. That's probably one for another podcast. I mean, you'd have to get into foreign policy here, and how we've supported the US in many different ways on their adventures around the world that we were banking on, or even the US was banking on, look, if we have this certain foreign policy agenda, then it's going to have a positive effect on our long-term economic policy. But it's not happened. I would argue that it has failed at every single turn. And as a response, or as a consequence of that failure, it has strengthened Chinese, Indian economies to a level that we were not expecting it to get to. And hence why we've now seen the increasing economic strengths of the BRICS nations. But yeah, I could go on.
Yeah, no, but it's very interesting because I don't know if you've noticed, but I've definitely noticed having more conversations with our clients and prospective clients about leaving the UK because of whether it's societal or cultural changes, but more recently, this budget recently from our good friend Rachel Reeves.
Not my good friend, your good friend.
Our beloved friend. And I think in particular, there were two changes in particular which have really annoyed the people that we speak to. Number one is inheritance tax on pensions, which is a huge change. I mean, I understand why they've brought it in because
I think there's a bigger change, but go ahead, make your point. I think there's another change which is worse than the changes on pensions. Sure. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I know there is a second change related to domicile, but I'll come on to that in a second. But yeah, inheritance tax on pensions, people are speaking to us increasingly. What do I do about this? Like, my inheritance tax liability has now jumped by minimum a few £100,000. It depends on the size of pensions that people have. I can understand why they've done it, because people were using pensions, and we were advising that people used pensions vehicles as legacy planning vehicles. So not using it for its intended purpose to provide income and capital during the pension holder's retirement. Totally understandable. But now we've got a catch-22 now where, let's say someone passes away after the age of 75. The rules are that the beneficiaries pay their marginal rates of income tax when inheriting that pension.
Correct.
That apparently is not being changed. That's staying the same. So you're paying that as well as 40% inheritance tax, which is, for me, it just seems absolutely incredible. That is going to be, that could be implemented. I'll just point out this is all subject to consultation, but from reading rumors or reading, around this topic right now, it seems that double tax, essentially 64%, it works out. 64% tax on inherited pensions. It's absolutely incredible, insane. So that's number one. The other thing is the change to the domicile regime. And perhaps just to preface this point, we were doing some research earlier. So there were 83. So in the tax year ending 2023, there was a combined total of 83,800 non-domiciled and deemed domiciled taxpayers in the UK paying, this is combined, £12.3 billion in tax and national insurance. Among that very small subset of the population. Now, just to be clear what the rules were and what they're changing to. So essentially, if you come here to the UK, then you can benefit from not paying tax on foreign income and gains as long as you don't remit it to the UK for a certain period of time. And if you can also opt for remittance basis taxation, where you pay an annual tax charge, and that's it. You don't pay any more tax on top of that. It was fairly, and also the use of something called excluded property trusts to remove offshore wealth from a person's estate. All fairly sensible, all fairly. I mean, to be honest with you, I can see why people say that the non-doms and deemed doms weren't paying their fair share of tax. They had all these opportunities to not pay the level of tax that they will be subject to now.
But the argument would be, Prajesh, is where is the morality of us, or not just morality here, morality and equity of the UK government charging inheritance tax or even income tax or any form of tax on the wealth that the UK had absolutely no contribution or no involvement in creating. So when it comes to non-doms, and they've got significant assets that they've generated themselves in their countries of birth, that the UK had played no part in increasing, and now the UK government wants to tax that under the UK inheritance tax regime. What's going to be quite interesting with the new rules would be how that impacts the any double taxation agreements that that may be in play between the UK and that particular government. But what do you think in terms of Yep, you correctly observed, or you've correctly cited how much non-DOMs are contributing to the UK economy. But do you think that's going to reduce now as a result of these changes?
Yeah, I mean, the massive point here is out of those 83,800 people, I'm sure it's more now, is that these are clearly a wealthy class of people, okay? And they're clearly from other jurisdictions. So they're wealthy, and then from abroad. Essentially, they're pretty much internationally mobile. A majority of them internationally mobile. So there's nothing really stopping them from packing up and going to another jurisdiction. You know, hence coming back to the topic of moving to Dubai, where you don't have to bother with any of this stuff really, with the tax regime over there. So I think the government does need to be really careful in how they tax this particular cohort, because it's clearly a beneficial cohort to the government, 12.3 billion a year. But yeah, just to be clear, so the new rules are that if you come to the UK, within the first 4 years, you can earn income and crystallize any gains and bring that back to the UK and not pay any form of income or capital gains tax. After 4 years, you will be taxed at UK tax rates, whether it's arising in the UK or not. Now, the inheritance tax, which is the bigger one, and I think this is the one that we're talking about here, again, we'll preface this that this is subject to consultation, still being subject to consultation, or I think you said that the draft legislation has been...
Yeah, so the finance bill is at committee stage right now in respect of the consequences to inheritance tax.
Right, okay. Essentially, this works around a 10-year rule. So if you come to the UK and you stay within the UK for 10 years, is it?
Yeah.
Then your worldwide assets, your UK assets, and anything in your home country or any other jurisdiction is subject to UK inheritance tax at 40%. Right. Okay. Yes.
So if you're in the UK for 10 years, if you're in the UK now and you're resident in the UK and you've been in the UK for 10 years, you're going to be liable to UK inheritance tax on your worldwide estate.
Yeah.
Now, draft legislation, like I'm saying, or draft legislation, draft proposals, in order to reduce your exposure to UK inheritance tax associated with your non-UK situs assets, so offshore assets, you have to leave the UK, and to give an example, best to give you an example. So if you have been in the UK for 13 years, you would have to leave the UK for 3 years for your offshore assets not to be liable to UK inheritance tax. Okay, but this could all change, or be tweaked. Okay, so don't rely on this particular podcast, guys. Get bespoke advice. But
well, we have to wait for these proposals and drafts to actually be implemented, right?
Yeah, no doubt. Yeah. But you've correctly cited two things, all right? And no doubt that's going to have a huge impact in UK's FDI, so which is foreign direct investment. And I find it quite troubling that the UK the UK has suffered from a decline in FDI, okay, which is foreign direct investment into the UK, all right, for several years now.
I think that was all precipitated from Brexit, but that's a topic for another.
That's definitely a topic for another conversation. Although, yes, it has gone up a little bit, 6% I think it was in 2023. But just think about this, okay? I don't think the pension rules are the most significant. What's the most significant is the restriction in business relief. So prior to October, your beloved friend Rachel Reeves, okay, we had a policy of 100% exemption on UK trading businesses, qualifying trading businesses. So literally, you could have a £10 million business, which is creating jobs for a whole host of people, okay? Not just within your business, but within the business of its suppliers, right? It's providing a great service to customers. How many stakeholders are there associated with profitable businesses? There are loads. Now, if that business if the shareholder is now taxed, which is currently at a rate of 20%, if the value of the business exceeds £1 million. Now, when it comes to those non-DOMs, all right, leave the non-DOMs to one side, even UK nationals. If we're setting up a business, or any entrepreneur, we have to now bear in mind that we're building a business, not just for our families or our communities, okay, but we're also building a business for the government. Because our business now, let's say we grow it to 10 million, 15 million, 20 million. The excess over £1 million is going to be taxed at 20%. Now the issue is, how do we fund that 20%? Does that require shares to be liquidated? Does it require a loan to be taken out? Okay, so business owners badly need advice, specialist advice in relation to how to manage that huge liability. The concern is where you've also got family businesses cascading or that has had longevity over several generations. I think they're going to suffer quite badly. This is going to impact trading businesses, and it's also going to impact farmers as well. They need advice like it's no tomorrow. You leave it too late, you are shooting yourself in the foot. I mean, even without these changes, very few people actually get expert advice on matters like this. Okay, and then during probate, they are acquainted with the level of inheritance tax. And what's another thing which didn't have an impact in the past, but the interest rate on unpaid inheritance tax after 6 months of somebody passing away.
Yeah, something like 7%.
7.25% simple interest.
Yeah.
So if you don't pay your inheritance tax bill within 6 months, it's going to be a 7.25%
interest
per annum interest rate charge. So you're not going to be paying 40%, you're going to be paying more than 40% until that tax charge is actually paid. And on average, probate tends to take like 2 years.
Yeah.
I've got a case that has been in probate for like 4.5 years.
Right, okay.
Not because we provide slow service. All right, it's not our fault.
Yeah.
Okay. So I think the loss of business relief or the restriction in business relief, agricultural relief, agricultural property relief, coupled with these changes in non-DOMs, as well as the pension changes, it's going to have a dramatic effect on UK's economic growth for short-term gain for the Labour government. Because yes, there will be inflows, but over the long term, I think it's going to be utterly disastrous. Having said that, do I believe the Conservatives could do any better? No, I don't. What do I think is going to happen? I think all logic tells me there is going to have to be a catastrophic economic crash, and I do not know how that will look like. That's probably for another podcast.
Yeah. And on that note, we've come up to our time. We'll leave you on a cliffhanger of a global economic crash caused by the Labour government. And the,
It's not caused by the Labour
caused by the
government.
Labour government
It's
and
caused.
the
It's
20% tax rate on the farm owners.
It's caused by a gross consumerist debt-based economy.
Oh yeah, no, absolutely.
Economic system.
I was only kidding around. But
Money play.
yeah, no, I think on that note, there's going to be an economic crash, and if you're a farm owner or a business owner, seek advice, ideally from us if you can. Yeah, so until next time, thank you very much.
Take care, guys.